I'm RB, the host of RB's Kitchen Talk. And in this episode, we're going to dive into what is one of the most confusing aspects of a relationship, and that is knowing the difference between love and love. And so, to help me, help us understand the difference, is my guest, Robin Wiley. Thank you for being with me again. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your professional background and your practice?
Okay, so Dr. Robin Wiley, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm over 30 years of experience in the field. I primarily work as a therapist, and certainly in my work as a therapist with clients, oftentimes issues with relationships and sex and how to navigate some very sometimes tough waters comes up a lot. In addition, I also have a specialty in my practice where I work with older adults and really trying to bring awareness to some of the concerns that they may have, because it is definitely the one group that we discriminate against, that we most likely will become part of that group.
Okay. All right. So let's go right into it. And my first question for you then is, how would you personally define lust and love?
Okay, so so we had kind of we pre-gamed a little bit. We had a little pre-show. And one of the things when I thought about, lust, I think one is we don't necessarily use that word. Or at least I should say the younger generation doesn't really use that word lust. I mean, when you think about it, I immediately think about, like, I do think about infatuation, like just the physical, the physicalness of attraction and just being, like connected to someone, but in a physical sense. And so I know we unpacked it a little bit about really the connection would be sex to lust. Okay.
Yes.
And a lot of times that can be very surface, even though I think, some may disagree with that. But I think lust is a very surface level because you're really attracted. You think about when we're attracted to somebody, you're usually pulled in by their physicalness. You know what I mean? So how they look, something about them that just attracts you to them. Love is a feeling. It's an emotion. I think love has a whole love is certainly a bit deeper, takes a bit longer. I'm not a big fan of the love at first sight. I'm not saying it, maybe it could happen, but I think love develops over time with someone. And so love takes probably a bit more effort and energy than maybe some are willing to expend.
Okay. So then, would you say that sex is just a physical act?
No, I don't think so. I think we could probably look at sex and intimacy. So I always look at it, I always kind of define it this way. Intimacy, sex does not need to include intimacy. Okay. Not necessarily. Okay. But I do feel like intimacy can stand alone. Intimacy, I think, can lead to sex. I feel like intimacy can be developed or should be kind of focus more on outside of the bedroom. I'll say it that way. But it doesn't have to include, it could include sex, but it doesn't have to. So I think they can be mutually exclusive, or they can certainly, impact each other or benefit each other. I feel like a lot of times when people talk about sex, they feel like intimacy is a part of it. And maybe it is in their mind, because I think these words are kind of defined for people, define these words for themselves individually. I'm giving my opinion on it, but I think society as a whole may have their opinion, but I think individually we have to define what that is, because sex to some people could be the act of penetration. For some, sex could be about touching. For some, sex could be just about oral sex. There's just different things, I think. I think we probably should have done a warning here. This might get a little R-rated. But I do feel like as we get older, sex may look very differently. What we desire may be different. So I think our preferences about sex become different. I think particularly for women, I would say, because I think we learn more about our bodies and maybe accept our bodies a bit more as we get older. I think we know more about what satisfies us and what doesn't. And we might be a bit more vocal about that than we are when we're younger.
Okay, then let's just skip then to do you think that more people in this culture are after love or after this physical attraction, satisfying their physical being?
So, okay, and I hope, I mean, this might, I don't know, this might get me some trouble, but I'm going to say it. I really feel like currently, I think folks are probably more, I think people are probably more concerned about sex, to be honest with you. I think that tends to be, I know I hear this from, my clients and folks, about, if they're dating or what have you, people really want to jump into the physical part of the relationship or the interaction a lot faster than they want to deal with, like, okay, let's get to know each other, let's take our time and that kind of thing. So I
Why do
think
you think that is? Why do you think that is?
I think sometimes people are trying to fulfill or think they're fulfilling an emotional need by fulfilling a physical need. That sex may fill a void. Say, because I mean, certainly there are things that happen when, we have sex. I mean, there's certainly, there's hormones that are, we get a dopamine rush, we may feel things, it feels good. You know what I mean? We're enjoying ourselves. It's an escape. So I think all those things we may feel are long-term solutions,
Mhm.
um, but not necessarily. So I think there are people that I think people may want love. I think people want love and they may want more serious relationships, but those things take time. And we live in a society where we want everything kind of instantly, and so sex can be instant, and sometimes, or let me not take away the fact that sometimes people have tried the long route
Mhm.
and they felt like, okay, they've been hurt or that kind of thing. So now they're just about fulfilling an immediate need, which is the physical need.
Okay. Okay. So then, if that's the case, how then are we able to determine if we are in a relationship that we want to where we want to love someone, or if we are just in a relationship where it's just physical?
So I think, I think part of it is we have to know first what it is we need. Okay, what it is, like, because I think that's individualized, that's different for everyone. So in general, like, certainly if you're in a relationship with somebody or something you're calling a relationship, and it's all you're doing is having sex, I'm not saying that's not a relationship, but is it the relationship that you want? Or are you unfulfilled in that because there's something that you're missing? So I think that's something to look to. Like, if you are someone that's saying, okay, hey, you know what? I just want to have sex, I just want to enjoy myself, that's it. Then that's different than saying I want to be in something that's more significant and more serious with somebody. I want a partnership, I want a long-term relationship. However, what I'm in right now is just about the physical part of it. Then you're kind of like, there's a dissonance there. You're saying one thing but you're doing another. And so I think it's important for individuals to understand or know for themselves like what it is they're looking for and be willing to, wait for that if that's what they want to do. I think sometimes we feel like, okay, that's just going to take too long.
What does someone do if they find themselves in a relationship where it seems to be all physical and they're not getting the satisfaction they need from it or they want from it? So they want it to be deeper and more of a commitment, more uh, less superficial. And up to this point, it's all physical. What do they do?
So one of the things they can do is talk to the person that they're involved with and see if they're, if you and this person are on the same page. I mean, so communication is such a big part of any kind of relationship, because even if it's just physical, that's still like a subcategory of a relationship. It is, you're having an interaction. If you think about a relationship being an interaction with someone else, you're sharing something very significant with this person. You're sharing yourself, and all that comes with you. And I think, oftentimes we're trying to remove the emotional side of a sexual relationship. And I don't feel like that's that easy. I think we try to make it seem as so, but I think you can still get attached to someone. There can still be emotional connections depending on how long that's been going on. But I feel like if you're in this and you feel like you want something, you want it to be deeper, more significant, you want something more, then I think it starts with having a conversation, because maybe your partner, maybe this person that you've been having sex with, maybe they feel the same way and they just haven't said anything either. However, if they don't, then you need to make a decision, because you have to look at what it is that you want long term. If you're okay with the way the situation is now, then by all means, have at it. But if you're not, then recognizing that you deserve something better. You deserve to be with someone who can give you what you need, and that person is out there somewhere. The issue is sometimes we just don't want to look. You know what I mean? We want to walk into a room, lock eyes with somebody, and that's our forever person. Okay? I'm sure somebody out there has that story. However, most people, the story is, I met somebody, we dated, it just took a while, and you work through some things and you get to that point where this becomes your person.
Okay. So if there are situations, and I get what you're saying, and it's absolutely sound, but there are men and women who are in relationships and they're in search of fulfillment. And they think that fulfillment will come from this sexual relationship. And so they overly expose themselves to the point where uh, their partner has just gotten used to it, you know? And so it's not as easy if you're looking to someone to fulfill you, to fulfill a part of you that perhaps can't be filled through sex, or even a relationship if it's not the right person.
Right. And I think we possibly need to really unpack that a little bit. So the idea that oftentimes we are looking for something external of us. Sometimes a lot of times that is a person or a relationship to fulfill something that's missing within. So it's not to say that someone can't contribute to your happiness, contribute to your overall great, well-being or what have you. But it's sometimes what needs to be healed within us, or what's missing within us, we need to work on that first before we venture out here to try to find somebody else to, distract us from it. Because that's why people will go from like one relationship to the next relationship to the next, and not necessarily recognize the patterns in those relationships, because if you see the same patterns in your relationships, then it's not the person, it's us. Okay. So I don't mean that, oh, it's something wrong with you. I don't mean it that way. But the thing is, if the same type of dynamic in a relationship keeps coming into your life, then we have to look internally. Why do I keep choosing these kind of people? What's going on with me? Why am I not seeing the red flags? What is it that I'm like? How am I labeling these situations? Whatever it is, we need to take a deeper look. Because sometimes you have to choose differently to get differently, to get a different, to get a different outcome. You can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. And sometimes you need to take time. Sometimes we need to take time to learn ourselves, to recognize who we are, to understand our worth. A lot of those are things we need to do kind of in the interim in relationships, in the in-between time, so to speak. But oftentimes we don't take the time to actually do that. We are looking for like, okay, wait a minute. I'm walking with the relationship box. We talked about that in the last show. Like we're walking with the relationship box. My box is empty. I got to fill that box. And so then we're just looking at who can I fill it with? Not does my box need this person? Is this person appropriate for my relationship box? Maybe not.
Right. Why then are so many people fooled, thinking that the physical attraction is really love?
I think because it sparks all of those feelings that we want to feel. Like it does kind of trigger some things for us hormonally, in terms of or like our like the endorphins, the dopamine, that type of. So it kind of mimics those feelings that we feel like, oh, this is so great. It's exciting. It's exciting to be attracted to someone. It's exciting to have that person to be attracted to you. A lot of times we use that to validate us. And so sometimes these sort of pseudo relationships will mimic something that we have always wanted, even though it may not be, credible. It may not be, true, or it may not amount to anything. And so we sometimes get pulled in before we really recognize that, wait a minute, this person is not the person.
Can a relationship based on physical attraction uh, somehow evolve into a love relationship if it's simply based on that physical attraction? I mean, what are the chances of that happening? Or can you have both?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could. I wouldn't say, I don't know what, like, I don't know if anybody's ever done any research on that. I'm sure there's probably something out there, but I think it possibly could. I think something could start off one way. It's just like how people start off as friends and then end up in like long-term relationships. I don't want to say that it can't. I think we just have to be careful, because it really is about two people coming together and saying, hey, you know what? Our relationship has been this way. It's only been a physical situation where we've just gotten together and had fun or whatever. And now I think I want to go in a different direction. So that means both people are coming together and deciding that. I think what happens often is one person wants that, the other person is saying they don't, and then the first person is trying to convince them that they do. And that's what we don't want to do. We don't need to, that's where we make our mistake. We don't need to convince someone that they need to be with us. If you're trying to convince somebody they need to be with you, then you probably need to walk away. Because if somebody wants to be with you, they're going to be with you. It's not, you don't have to put up like a poster. You know what I mean? You don't have to do all that. You shouldn't have to do that much. This person will make themselves available. And I think those are the flags that we don't always recognize. Like, people not being consistent, somebody disappearing for like days on end, you don't hear from them. And then all of a sudden they pop up like, nothing happened. Someone who's not emotionally available. I know we talk about that a lot, that ability to be, and what that really means is, it's not to say somebody's got to be wearing their emotions on their sleeve, but it's someone's ability to be present and to be able to connect, to be able to hopefully talk about their feelings, or to be able to express their feelings to the person that they're attracted to, or what have you. So some of those things can really be red flags if they're not present. But I think a big one is if there are things that you need from this person that you're seeing and they cannot provide them for you, and when you tell them this is what you need from them, they still are not trying to provide that for you, that's probably the biggest red flag.
Is it possible then for a relationship like that to shift into what we often call toxic, because, and perhaps it's toxic because of I don't know, the anger or the resentment. But is it possible that that sort of situation can shift into something that's quite toxic?
I think so, absolutely. I mean, because literally what can make a toxic relationship is, lack of communication, lack of commitment a lot of times. And like you said, the resentment piece. I mean, over time, especially if somebody's been in a relationship with someone, and there's unmet needs, there's unspoken expectations, there's unmet expectations, then you're just kind of coexisting. And first of all, life is just too short to be living like that with anybody, and so I applaud people who walk away from those situations, with the understanding that, like, yes, it can be hard to find someone else. It can be, but it also, is it better to stay with somebody who you're not happy with? And you're not happy with, but you're still trying to just push through.
Okay. Talk to us about soul ties.
Soul ties, like in
Mhm.
terms of
In
uh,
terms of
a soulmate.
a relationship.
So, and this may not be the popular opinion. I do believe, I heard someone talk, it's a lady that wrote a book, and I heard her in a podcast, and she talked about this idea of the soulmate, or like you said, soul ties. I feel like that's created. I don't know that I necessarily, I mean, I would love to think that there's somebody out here for everybody. I don't know that there's someone that, like, when I was born and they were born, it was just automatically decided we should be together and then we got to find each other. Okay. I don't know that I necessarily subscribe to that. I do feel like you can meet someone and that person can become your person, and you can become their person because of how you connect, communicate, work through things together, because it is about learning someone. I think, there is such value in taking time to learn somebody, because and learning them over time, because we change. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people get into the most significant relationship of their life maybe in their late 20s, early 30s. Okay. And they get married and then they stay married for like 20 plus years. And during that time, they have children. They may have changed jobs or careers. They've done different things, bought a home, all these major things. Right. And in that time, oftentimes couples have forgotten how to date each other. They've forgotten, like, what they did to get together, they don't continue to do to stay together. So communication wanes. There's different things that occur that they may not talk about. Needs change, on both sides,
Sure.
And so as a result of that, a lot of times people get to that 20, 25-year mark, because that's around the time, when a lot of times the kids are leaving, the kids have left, they're going to college, you have an empty nest kind of, and then you have two people who now have to sit on the couch beside each other and look at each other, and realize that they don't really care for each other that much anymore. And so I think you may have thought that person was your soulmate, but realizing that you have to cultivate, you have to nurture a relationship. So I think your soulmate is created. I think they're developed. You know what I mean? They're nurtured. And and when that person is your soulmate, when you are looking at that person, years from now, whatever the case may be, and you're like, you know what? I'm still with you. You know what I mean? And it's not out of obligation. It's not because we got too many things in our name together, the financial reasons, because that's a lot of times why people stay together. But it's really because you're my friend. Now, I won't necessarily say best friend, because I think, people always talk about that, best friends and stuff. I don't think that's necessary, but you're my friend. I care about you and I want the best for you. And you feel the same about me. And we're navigating life together.
Right. Now, is there potentially a negative side to soul ties, where there's more of a codependency, where there is you're in a relationship that's not healthy, and so you've connected with someone, but they're not with the person that you should be with, and perhaps you've misinterpreted a lot of the signs or signals. And so now you're in a relationship with someone you've connected with very strongly, and you're not quite sure what to do, because you are seeing those signals, those red flags, but you've connected with someone very strongly.
So I think sometimes we might mislabel the connection. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes that connection needs to stay at friendship and maybe not go into a relationship. It just depends. I mean, I think there's certain scenarios, but I think the idea of, sometimes we're looking so much for something, for that deeper connection. And so somebody appears and they seem to give us that, and we might mislabel it. We might mislabel the nature of the relationship or what have you. And so, or we're dependent now, whether you want to say codependency or what have you, but that dependency on this person to now fulfill an emotional need for us, when either they're not doing it or they do it sometimes. And sometimes, we cut people a lot of breaks. Like, we give people a lot of slack. We don't hold them accountable, and they may not be holding us accountable for what we need to do within the relationship. So I think it has to be personally defined, and again, that goes back to, like, what do you need? What do you expect? So I think you have to know those things. And sometimes it takes us a while to know that. And it might change as we age, as different things, because our priorities in terms of being with somebody, it shifts. It does. It shifts as we get older. And I don't mean like in old age, but just hopefully from your 30s to your 40s to your 50s, you're not still looking at the same things in relationships. Your needs may be very different.
So how should women, I'm going to speak to the woman first. How should she approach any new relationship to ensure that she is looking at this potential partner in the right light and making sure that she's not confusing what could potentially be a physical attraction with love? What should her mindset be when she's entering into this relationship? And at some point, sex may become a part of what's happening, what happens in that relationship.
So I would suggest, if before, like even before you start, like if somebody's going back into the dating realm or whatever, even before you start that, like you just have to know, like know yourself. Know yourself, know what you need, know what you're looking for. Because here's the thing, dating, I think a lot of times we go, and I think women in particular, we go into dating with the idea that I always say, date to date. That's a motto that I date to date, because oftentimes we're like, I'm dating to meet my future husband, I'm dating to meet my soulmate, so gotta understand, you're setting up an expectation there. And so as you date the first person and then they do something or it doesn't work out, there's disappointment. You date the next person, another dud, doesn't work out. Then you're dating the third person. So you're creating like just this constant like time, like feelings of disappointment, of regret, of remorse. And eventually people just get like, I just don't want to date anymore. Because you're dating with the expectation that you're going to go out with this person and that's your future husband. It's like when we're kids and we're writing on the notebook, Robin and such in the heart. You know
Right.
what I mean? It's that kind of mindset. So if you date to date, then that means I'm going out with you. We're going to see, we're going to see, we have a nice time. I'm going to be in the moment and we'll see what happens. It's very important to stay in the moment with dating. It's very important to stay in the moment with relationships, because what happens is they need time to grow and to evolve. So you might meet this person, you might go out on a date with somebody, and they might have some characteristics that you're like, oh, okay, wait a minute. Everything seems good. They haven't done anything crazy, because I think that's what we all kind of think in our mind. They haven't said anything off-putting, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's date number one. All right, let's see how date number two goes. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we get caught up in this. Wait a minute, we went on this one date. Oh my God, they seem fantastic. I think this is him. I think this is the one, and it's like, but you don't know him. So you don't know, he may not be the one. So we don't want to get our hopes up. I'm not saying that we need to kind of like, I'm not saying we need to be pessimistic. You can be optimistic, but you also got to be realistic. You still got to get to know someone, and you have to know what your needs are, because we really need to know, can this person fulfill my needs? And they need to know what their needs are too, so they can know the same from you.
Right. So, and I think earlier you said that when we enter into these relationships, we've got to be healthy, because we can't look to someone to fill a void or need that's in us that they may be unable to fill.
Yeah. Are you date ready? Yeah. And that goes for both. That's for men and women. Are you date ready? Like, and it's, I mean, and that's something you have to define for yourself. But if you're struggling with different things, if you're not, I think people know that when they're not ready, you know what I mean? But I think sometimes we think that, okay, but if I get in a relationship, then that will be everything I need. And it's like, but no, you're about to bring all your stuff into that relationship.
Right. Now, let me just, before we close, I've got to ask this question. And you talked about the 3 or 4 relationships that we get into, and then, it's just this pattern. But is there a part of us that we, that dies, or that isn't, that we deaden after each relationship? Is there a part of us that is just scattered because we've been with so many people that we're not quite sure who we are? And I mean, we may have a part that's with Joe, or a part of us that's with Kevin, or or Anthony, and it leaves us exposed because we've had so many partners.
Right. And I mean, so, I mean, it could. I like to say that, we need to learn from those relationships. A lot of times we don't take the time to learn from those relationships. So it's just like if you think about if you work a job, right? And you end up leaving that job because it's just not serving you, what have you, you know, uh, you're not going to go to the same, you might go to the next job, but you've learned some things from that last job that you probably aren't going to do. Now, are there times when people get kind of hardened? And I think that's why a lot of times now we see the trend where people don't want to be in a relationship. You see people that they just opted out. They're like, I'm not going to be in a relationship. I'll just be in something that is maybe just the physical or what have you. And I think that is where the lust piece comes in, because it's like, okay, I just need to fulfill that need and that's it. I don't want to, because you're right. People don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to expose themselves emotionally, and it hurts. And I think that's what happens a lot of times now. I think it's different with men and with women, my theory. So, I'll just take this one, is that I think for men, when they get hurt early on by, when they get hurt, they decide, I think in that moment, I will never feel that again. And I think that's why a lot of times men will take a different approach to relationships. Women, on the other hand, I feel like it takes us a little longer. We will date this one, like you said, date Anthony, date, we will date and we will keep on because we're trying to find the right person. I think I'm not saying that we need to become hardened, but I think we also do need to realize, like, what did I learn about myself from that relationship? Okay. And maybe work on that. You know what I mean? Because sometimes we're so quick to jump into the next situation and not recognizing, like, we haven't really taken time to process. I'm not saying you need to take years or whatever, but I mean, take a little time to reflect. Was there some things that I did? Was there something about him? Was I attracted to the wrong things? Were there elements of him that I liked? And this goes back to, again, knowing what you need in a relationship, what you need from someone else, and making sure that when you get into the next one, not to say that on the first date you're communicating everything you need, because that's not good either.
Realistic.
Yeah, that's not realistic. Like, you're going out on a date, get to know the person, take some time. But as time goes on, and if this is somebody you're continuing to see, verbalize. And I'm saying, like, we need to stop thinking that people can guess. People are not guessing what's in our head. You need to tell them, this is what I need. This is what I'm looking for. Okay. And like I said, I'm not saying do that the first date, because we see this stuff on like social media where women go out on the first date and they're like, I'm looking for this, and that. And do you have it? Yes or no? And men are like, I'm out of here. You know what I mean? So I think it's good for you to know it, you know what I mean? But also make sure it's not just about the tangible, like, what is it about? What do you need to feel? And what are you also bringing to the table? Dating has definitely taken on a different turn, in recent years. I mean, and unfortunately, we see a lot of it exposed on social media, with, how, the expectations that have to do with finances and who's paying for this. And I got pre-date expenses, all of this kind of craziness that has nothing to do realistically with finding the person that you're probably going to want to be with that you might want to be with for the rest of your life. So.
I can't get away from the subject though, Robin. And I know what you're saying about, learning, but there is an impact on a person's psyche, on their emotions, on their soul, on their heart, when they go from one relationship to another. And yes, they should learn. But when you've been in multiple relationships, there has to be a negative impact left on a person, because how could there not be? And whether it's just feeling that you're not you'll never find someone because you're not enough, or there's no one who loves me, or you just kind of turn off of men altogether, but there's got to be some negative effect in multiple relationships.
Right.
And I understand that you should learn, but
right. I'm not saying that it isn't. I'm just saying that sometimes we need to reframe how we think of that. Because if I have a negative experience and there's a lesson I'm able to take from it,
right,
then that's what's more important. You know what I mean? Because if it's going to help me to grow, granted, yes, if I could help my clients and people avoid negative relationships, that would be great. But you don't know. So unfortunately, we have to take the chance. It is a chance. even someone who in the beginning, the relationship could be fantastic and great, and you love this person and it's everything's wonderful. And then there's a shift, something changes. And then you end up, how many, I'm sure when people get divorced, they're not going into their marriage thinking we're going to end up divorced. Things happen throughout the course, throughout the tenure of the marriage that result in that. And all I'm saying is that I do feel like, depending on the length of the relationship, that certainly, can be certainly impactful. Because I think for women in particular, oftentimes we put all our eggs in that basket. We've defined ourselves as the wife, the lover, the mother, all those things. And this has been, women keep, they are a big part of keeping the family together. Okay. And so then when that doesn't, we can feel a sense of failure. We can feel like, okay, are we less than we can? And especially as we're older, we can feel like you said, is anyone going to want me? That type of thing. What I'm saying is that, take some time to be able to process that, because you don't want to take all that with you into the next situation. So we don't want to be too quick to jump into the next relationship. However, you don't want to take yourself completely, because you deserve companionship. You deserve to be with somebody. You deserve to be loved. And I think when we know our worth and we acknowledge that, and sometimes that takes us a minute, because we've been looking at our worth through the lens of a not so great relationship.
And I think that is perhaps one of the reasons why people do go from relationship to relationship, because they don't know their worth, and why it doesn't pan out the way they want it to, because they're not assured of who they are. And so they accept minimum. And so when they're rejected or it doesn't work out, they still haven't learned, right? That I am valuable. I am
in that relationship.
Yeah. I'm
So,
sorry?
yeah. No, I said also why they may stay in a toxic relationship.
Exactly.
We have a lot of people who are in relationships that are not good at all for them. They're not happy, but they are staying, and they will come up with all kinds of reasons why they're staying. And a lot of times, it is about the connection. It's like, oh, well, we got a house together, we got this. But a lot of times people, they're concerned, how's it going to look? Or we got the kids and all this kind of stuff. So we have to be, mindful of that, of, if we're in something that is not, and it can be hard. I'm not saying it's easy to leave. It's not, but it can be hard. But sometimes making that decision can be very, very beneficial for you.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So we've gone full circle. And so let's go back to the first question. And you talked about defining love as being extremely different from lust, or the physical attraction, or the chemistry. So for those who are seeking love, what advice would you give them? Additional advice would you give them in our closing?
So I think the best advice I could say is take your time. Take your time. Love is not instant. This is not you going to buy a puppy. You know what I mean? This needs to take time, because love is not all you need. I will say that it's not. Love is not the only thing that's needed. There is other things. There's communication, there's compassion, there's empathy, there is the ability to want to, because love can be sometimes the glue, and that's okay. But I think you need to take your time. We need to take our time to get to know people, to spend time with them, and of course that's going to involve, some lust, and that's going to involve sexual activity possibly at some point, and that's fine when you're ready for that. But sometimes, including that too early, especially if you want something more significant with someone, if you include that physical part, that can cloud your judgment. That can sort of give you that, put on the rose-colored glasses, and then you don't see necessarily the red flags that were standing right in front of you the whole time, possibly on fire in front of you.
That's a really, really good point. Real good point. All right. One last question. We talked prior to the show, and that had to do with the 5 languages.
Oh, yes.
I just want to touch on the fact that when we're going into these relationships and we're getting to know each other, explain what the 5 languages should mean to each partner.
So one of the things I think with the 5 love languages, and I won't go into it, because that's like a whole other show. But I
Yes.
think the main thing we have to realize is a lot of times we know how we want to be loved,
Mhm.
and that is typically how we love others. So
Mhm.
that's not really how the love languages work. And
Okay.
even though there's been some, people have expanded on the love languages and put some other stuff in there, but the idea is to get to know, you need to know your love language. You need to make sure your partner knows your love language, but you need to know their love language.
Right.
Because a lot of times where relationships are missing something is that you're loving someone based on how you want to be loved, not how they want to be loved.
Mhm.
And you have to realize, let's say if their love language is physical touch, and if that's not your thing, then and you're not willing to compromise in that area or some type of way, then that could pose some concerns. That could really kind of put a wedge between, because then you have someone with unfulfilled needs in the
Right.
relationship.
Right. So I wanted to just touch on that because, as we go into approaching these new relationships, it's important for us to know who we're dealing with and what their needs are. And so that's very, very important. So thanks for elaborating on that. All
Well,
right. Any closing remarks?
just I wish everybody great times in whatever type of relationship they are seeking. I hope you find that and the happiness, but understanding too that happiness and worth and understanding all needs to begin with ourselves, and then you
Good.
know transfer it out to someone else.
Very good. All right. Thank you, Robin, so much for being with me again.
Thank you.
And this is RB's Kitchen Talk, where the heart touches the soul. Thanks for listening. Take care. Thanks, Robin. Great.